Zuri Williams, a 17-year-old honor student, kneels on the cold marble floor of Westridge County Courthouse as Judge Montgomery Blackwood glares down with satisfaction. Officers flank her, hands on their weapons. Her attorney frantically objects, but is silenced. Hidden recording device captures everything. Tears stream down Zuri's face, but her eyes flash with determination. None of them realize what will happen in the next 5 minutes will shatter the entire corrupt judicial system of Westridge County forever. Can a single act of forced humiliation become the catalyst that brings down decades of systemic racism? If you believe in justice for all, take a moment to like and subscribe, because tomorrow's special episode reveals how ordinary citizens can fight back against corrupt systems. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed discrimination in your local courts. Zuri Williams was everything a parent could hope for in a daughter. At 17, she maintained a perfect GPA at Westridge High School, captained the debate team to 3 consecutive state championships, and volunteered 20 hours weekly at IE, the Pine Heights Community Center, teaching literacy to underprivileged elementary students. Her dream of becoming a civil rights attorney stemmed from her grandmother, who had marched with Dr. King. Every teacher predicted greatness for this extraordinary young woman with the brilliant mind and compassionate heart. None could have foreseen how quickly her world would shatter on that fateful April evening. The sun was setting as Zuri drove her second-hand Toyota Corolla home from the community center in Pine Heights, an affluent white neighborhood where most homes started at $700,000. She had stayed late helping a 9-year-old boy finally master reading comprehension after weeks of struggle. The smile on his face when he successfully read an entire paragraph independently was worth every extra minute. Checking her watch, she realized her mother would be worried. She took Maple Avenue, which would get her home 15 minutes faster than the freeway at rush hour. Blue and red lights flashed in her rearview mirror as she approached the intersection of Maple and Westridge Boulevard. Zuri immediately signaled and pulled to the curb, wondering what she had done wrong. She had maintained exactly 30 miles per hour in the 30 mph zone. Her registration was current and her brake lights functioned perfectly. She rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, just as her mother had taught her to do whenever stopped by police. Detective Shane Caldwell approached from the driver's side, while Officer Jason Reed positioned himself by the passenger window, shining a flashlight into the car interior. Detective Caldwell was a 20-year veteran of Westridge Police Department, with salt and pepper hair and cold blue eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "License, registration, and insurance," Caldwell demanded, without explanation for the— "Stop. May I ask why I was pulled over, sir?" Zuri inquired politely, reaching slowly for her documents from the glove compartment. "Just provide your documents," Caldwell repeated, his tone hardening. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "I volunteer at the Pine Heights Community Center, sir. I was tutoring children this afternoon." Zuri handed over her perfectly organized documents. Officer Reed circled to join his partner, inspecting Zuri through narrowed eyes. "Community center closes at 6. It's nearly 7:30. I stayed late to help a student who needed extra assistance, sir. The director, Mrs. Branson, can confirm this." Caldwell examined her license with exaggerated scrutiny. "You live clear across town in Oakwood. Pretty far from home, aren't you?" "Pine Heights Community Center serves disadvantaged children from all neighborhoods, sir. I was heading directly home." Zuri maintained respectful eye contact despite the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. "Your vehicle matches the description of one involved in a residential burglary reported 30 minutes ago," Reed stated, leaning in through her window, invading her personal space. "Mind if we take a look inside?" Zuri felt her heart rate accelerate, but kept her voice steady. "I was at the community center the entire afternoon, sir. There are security cameras and several staff members who can verify my whereabouts. Please feel free to call the director." "Listen to how she talks," Reed smirked at his partner. "Trying real hard to sound white, isn't she?" Zuri felt the sting of his words, but remained composed. "I'm simply answering your questions, officer." "Step out of the vehicle," Caldwell ordered suddenly, his hand moving to rest on his weapon. "May I please call my mother first? She will be worried about me." Zuri reached for her phone on the passenger seat. "She's going for something," Reed shouted, drawing his weapon. Before Zuri could explain, Detective Caldwell yanked open her door, grabbed her arm, and roughly pulled her from the vehicle. She felt herself slammed against the car, her face pressed against the cold metal. Handcuffs bit into her wrists painfully tight. "Please, sir, I wasn't doing anything wrong." Zuri struggled to remain calm as tears threatened. "I have rights. I want to call my mother." "Rights? You want to talk about rights?" Caldwell sneered, tightening the cuffs until Zuri gasped in pain. "How about the rights of the family whose home was just burglarized?" While Caldwell held her against the car, Reed began searching the vehicle without permission or warrant. After several minutes, he emerged from the back seat holding a small velvet pouch. Well, what do we have here?" Reed emptied the pouch into his palm, revealing several gold rings and a pearl necklace. "Looks like our honor student has been busy." "Those aren't mine," Zuri exclaimed in shock. "I have never seen those before in my life. Someone must have planted them." "Save it for the judge," Caldwell growled, shoving her toward the patrol car. "You're under arrest for felony burglary." The ride to the police station passed in a blur of panic and confusion. Zuri tried repeatedly to explain she had been at the community center, but each attempt was met with threats to add resisting arrest to her charges. At the station, she was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in an interrogation room. Her requests to call her mother were repeatedly denied. "Just tell us who your accomplices were, and things will go easier for you," Reed suggested. During the third hour of questioning, no parent or attorney had been called despite her being a minor. "I don't have accomplices because I didn't commit any crime," Zuri insisted, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Please call my mother. This is illegal." Meanwhile, across town, Elaine Williams was frantic with worry. Her daughter had never been late without calling. After dozens of unanswered calls to Zuri's phone, she began calling hospitals, then reluctantly the police. The desk sergeant claimed no knowledge of any arrests matching her daughter's description. It wasn't until nearly midnight, when Elaine went personally to the station, that she discovered her daughter was in custody, charged with felony burglary. "This is impossible," Elaine protested to the sergeant. "My daughter is an honor student. She volunteers with children. She has never been in trouble a day in her life." "Tell it to the judge," the sergeant replied, without looking up from his computer. "Arraignment is tomorrow morning. Bail will be set then." What neither Zuri nor her mother knew was that Westridge had a long documented history of racial discrimination within its justice system. Police brutality complaints filed by black residents were routinely dismissed without investigation. Crime statistics showed black defendants received sentences averaging 60% longer than white defendants for identical crimes. At the center of this systemically racist machine stood three power players: Police Chief Robert Hargrove, who had personally buried dozens of misconduct allegations against his officers; Judge Montgomery Blackwood, notorious for his disparate sentencing practices; and Detective Shane Caldwell, whose arrest record showed a disturbing pattern of targeting minorities with little evidence. Zuri Williams, with her perfect record and bright future, was about to become their next victim. But what they couldn't know was that their actions that night would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose decades of corruption and change Westridge forever. By morning, Elaine Williams had mortgaged her modest home to hire attorney Marcus Johnson, the only lawyer in Westridge with a reputation for successfully challenging police misconduct. A distinguished black man in his 50s, Marcus had once been a civil rights attorney in Chicago before returning to his hometown, determined to fight the injustice he witnessed growing up. His record of victories against the police department had earned him the enmity of Chief Hargrove Judge Blackwood and District Attorney Victoria Preston. "Mrs. Williams, I need to be honest with you," Marcus explained in his small office located above a barbershop in Oakwood. "Your daughter's case has landed in the worst possible courtroom. Judge Blackwood and I have history, and not the good kind. I once filed an ethics complaint against him for sentencing disparities that hurt my clients. He did not appreciate it." "But my daughter is innocent," Elaine insisted. "She has no record, not even a detention in school. She was at that community center. There are witnesses." "I believe you," Marcus assured her, "but we need to prepare for an uphill battle. Judge Blackwood, District Attorney Preston, and Chief Hargrove form what many defense attorneys call the Westridge Triangle. Cases that enter rarely escape without maximum penalties, especially for defendants of color. The arraignment confirmed Marcus' worst fears. Judge Montgomery Blackwood, a 60-year-old white man with steel-gray hair and perpetually disapproving expression, presided from his elevated bench like a monarch. District Attorney Victoria Preston stood at the prosecution table, her pearls and designer suit projecting an image of professional righteousness. At 45, Preston had built her career on being tough on crime while quietly preparing to run for state senate. Docket number 47329, State versus Zuri Williams, the clerk announced. Charge of felony burglary. Zuri entered, wearing an orange jumpsuit, her wrists and ankles shackled. Elaine gasped at the sight of her daughter, dark circles under her eyes. Hair uncombed, stripped of all dignity, Marcus placed a steadying hand on Elaine's arm. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests remand without bail," Preston announced. "The defendant was caught with stolen property from a home in Pine Heights. The item's value exceeds $50,000, making this a Class B felony." "Your Honor, this is preposterous," Marcus countered, approaching the bench. "Ms. Williams is a 17-year-old honor student with absolutely no record. She has deep community ties and poses zero flight risk. We request immediate release on her own recognizance. Furthermore, the prosecution has provided no evidence connecting my client to this alleged burglary, beyond items suspiciously found in her car during a questionable traffic stop." Judge Blackwood peered down at Zuri over his reading glasses. "Ms. Williams, do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor, but I am innocent," Zuri replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "I was volunteering at the Pine Heights Community Center when this burglary allegedly occurred. There are multiple witnesses and security cameras that can verify my whereabouts." "Save your testimony for trial," Blackwood snapped. "Based on the seriousness of the charges, bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody until trial, which I am setting on the expedited calendar for 2 weeks from today." "2 weeks," Marcus objected. "Your Honor, the defense requires adequate time to prepare. This timeline is completely unreasonable and violates my client's right to due process. Your objection is noted, Counselor. The defendant will be held at Westridge Juvenile Detention Center." Blackwood banged his gavel with finality. As Zuri was led away, she locked eyes with her mother, communicating silent love and strength. Marcus immediately filed motions to suppress evidence from the illegal search, to dismiss charges based on lack of evidence, and to compel the prosecution to provide security footage from the community center. Judge Blackwood consistently misplaced these motions, delaying their consideration while fast-tracking the trial date. Desperate for help, Elaine approached the Westridge Daily Tribune with her daughter's story. Editor Calvin Reeves initially showed interest, but suddenly changed his mind. The following day, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams, but we've decided this isn't newsworthy," Reeves explained, refusing to meet her eyes. Perhaps after the trial. Elaine later discovered that the newspaper received significant advertising revenue from businesses owned by Charles Montgomery, a wealthy developer with close ties to both Judge Blackwood and D.A. Preston. Meanwhile, Zuri faced her own nightmare inside the Juvenile Detention Center, where Sergeant Frank Miller, a guard with numerous excessive force complaints, took special interest in making her life miserable. "Looks like we've got a princess in our house," Miller announced during Zuri's first meal in the common area. "Too good to eat what we serve?" He deliberately knocked her tray to the floor. "Oops, guess you're not hungry." For 3 days, Zuri received half portions or no food at all. Other girls warned her not to complain, it would only get worse. Miller allowed older detainees to steal her bedding and toiletries, looking the other way when they threatened her. On the 4th day, a girl named Leticia Martinez approached Zuri during recreation time. "Don't react, but I'm going to help you," she whispered. "My brother was railroaded by the same cop who got you. I know you're innocent." Leticia became Zuri's protector, showing her how to navigate the dangerous environment of detention, teaching her which guards were decent and which to avoid at all costs. It was the first glimmer of hope since her arrest. Outside, Marcus Johnson worked tirelessly investigating Zuri's case. He discovered Detective Caldwell had accumulated 17 misconduct, Complaints over his career all suspiciously resolved with no disciplinary action. When Marcus filed motions to access these records, Judge Blackwood immediately issued a gag order, restricting all parties from discussing the case, publicly claiming potential jury contamination. "Hare's trying to bury this," Marcus explained to Elaine, during a late-night strategy session. "But I have a plan. We need to get Zuri a recording device. If we can document what happens inside that detention center and courtroom, we might have leverage." Through careful planning and a sympathetic guard who had witnessed Miller's abuse, Marcus managed to smuggle a small recording device disguised as a hair clip to Zuri, with instructions to document everything. What neither Marcus nor Zuri knew was that the conspiracy against her reached further than they imagined. That very evening, Detective Caldwell, Chief Hargrove, and Judge Blackwood met privately in the judge's chambers, discussing how to ensure Zuri's case resulted in conviction. "This Johnson is becoming a problem," Blackwood growled. "He's filing motions." "So about Caldwell's record?" "It won't matter," Hargrove assured him. "Preston will crush this case. The girl has no proof she was at that community center. The director suddenly can't remember if she stayed late." "Make sure it stays that way," Blackwood replied. "The commissioner wants this handled quickly and quietly." None of them suspected that their corrupt alliance was about to face its greatest challenge in the form of a 17-year-old girl with a hidden recording device and an unbreakable spirit. Did you know that 93% of black defendants are pressured to accept plea deals even when innocent? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe our justice system needs urgent reform. Hit like and subscribe to follow Zuri's fight against this corrupt system. What lengths would you go to if your child was wrongfully imprisoned and the entire system was working against them? Stay tuned to see what shocking discoveries attorney Marcus Johnson makes next about this conspiracy. While Zuri endured her 7th day in juvenile detention, Marcus Johnson worked through another sleepless night. Something about this case bothered him beyond the obvious injustice. Why would the entire Westridge legal system mobilize so aggressively against one teenage girl? The rush to trial, the denied bail, the gag order it felt orchestrated, excessive even by Westridge standards. "Follow the money," his old law professor used to say. Acting on this advice, Marcus began investigating property, records and financial disclosures for everyone involved in Zuri's case. What he discovered sent chills down his spine. Judge Montgomery Blackwood, District Attorney Victoria Preston, and Police Chief Robert Hargrove were all investors in Westridge Correctional Holdings, a private company that operated both the adult, prison and juvenile detention facilities in the county. Their quarterly profits directly correlated with the facility's occupancy rates. Further digging revealed a disturbing pattern. Since these three had assumed their respective positions, conviction rates for Black and Latino defendants had increased 72%. Average sentences nearly doubled. Juvenile detentions had tripled. Each statistic represented lives destroyed, but more importantly to the conspirators, each statistic represented profit. Inside the detention center, Zuri activated her hidden recording device whenever Sergeant Miller approached. She documented his verbal abuse, his deliberate withholding of meals, and his encouragement of other detainees to harass her. Letitia helped her hide the device and taught her when to use it for maximum effect. "You have to be careful," Letitia warned one afternoon in the recreation yard. "Miller has informants everywhere. If he catches you recording, that device will disappear and you'll end up in solitary on some made-up charge." "Why are you helping me?" Zuri asked. "You're putting yourself at risk." Letitia's eyes hardened. 2 years ago, my brother Mateo was arrested by Detective Caldwell, claimed he found drugs in his car. My brother never touched drugs in his life. He was saving for college, had a scholarship lined up. Nobody believed him. He's serving 5 years in adult prison because he couldn't afford a lawyer like yours. The public defender told him to plead guilty or face 15 years. The next day, Miller caught Letitia passing Zuri an extra dessert from her tray. Without warning, he grabbed Letitia by the arm and dragged her away. Hours later, Zuri learned. Letitia had been placed in solitary confinement for contraband distribution. Alone again, Zuri nearly surrendered to despair. That night, lying on her thin mattress, she recalled her grandmother's stories about being jailed during civil rights protests, about maintaining dignity in the face of dehumanization. "They can imprison your body, baby girl," her grandmother had told her, "but only you decide if they imprison your spirit." Drawing on this ancestral strength, Zuri resolved to continue fighting for herself and for Leticia. Outside, Marcus enlisted help from Isabel Rodriguez, an ACLU attorney specializing in systemic discrimination cases. Together, they uncovered 4 previous cases involving the same officers who arrested Zuri, each following a suspiciously similar pattern: traffic stops of minority drivers in affluent neighborhoods, discovered evidence, pressured confessions, expedited trials before Judge Blackwood. "This isn't random," Isabel concluded, reviewing the files in Marcus's office. "This is a system designed to funnel specific types of defendants into their private prison pipeline." A breakthrough came when Marcus located Thomas Jenkins, a janitor at the Pine Heights Community Center, who remembered seeing Zuri the evening of the alleged burglary. "She was there until at least 7, helping that Rodriguez boy with his reading," Jenkins confirmed. "I remember because I was locking up and had to ask her to wrap it up." For a brief moment, hope flared. Then, the day before Jenkins was to sign an official statement, he called Marcus in panic. "I can't do it," he whispered into the phone. "2 cops came to my house last night, said they'd arrest my son on some old warrant if I got involved. I got 3 kids, man, I'm sorry." The setbacks continued. Marcus arrived at his office one morning to find the door lock broken, client files scattered, and his computer compromised. The file containing all his evidence for Zuri's case was gone, both digital and physical copies. That same week, Zuri developed severe anxiety attacks in detention. Her requests to see a doctor were repeatedly denied by Sergeant Miller. When she finally collapsed during mealtime, a nurse named Kelly Patterson examined her. "This girl has severe anxiety and shows signs of malnutrition," Nurse Patterson documented in Zuri's medical file. "Recommend immediate medical intervention and investigation into her care conditions." The next day, Nurse Patterson was fired. When Marcus requested Zuri's medical records, the report had been altered, describing only mild anxiety consistent with normal adjustment to detention. Meanwhile, Marcus began receiving anonymous threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. "Drop the Williams case if you know what's good for you and your family," the distorted voice warned. Isabel's investigation uncovered another disturbing connection. Westridge Juvenile Detention Center received a management bonus of $3,000 per month for each bed, filled above 75% capacity. The facility had been at 98% capacity for the past 3 years, ever since Judge Blackwood began denying bail to most minority defendants. What neither Marcus nor Isabel yet realized was that someone even more powerful than Judge Blackwood was pulling the strings. In an upscale country club across town, Detective Caldwell and Chief Hargrove met privately in a corner booth. "Johnson's getting too close," Caldwell muttered. "He's connecting dots we can't afford to have connected." "The commissioner is concerned," Hargrove replied, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "This Williams girl was supposed to be a simple case. Quick conviction, example made, done. Now it's drawing attention. What does he want us to do?" "Whatever is necessary. This goes beyond one case. If the arrangement is exposed, we all go down." The commissioner they referred to was Charles Montgomery, the wealthiest man in Westridge County, whose financial empire included not just the private detention facilities, but construction companies that built them, service providers that supplied them, and pharmaceutical companies that medicated their inmates. Every incarcerated body represented multiple revenue streams in his diversified portfolio of human suffering. With the trial date rapidly approaching, Judge Blackwood denied Marcus's motion for a continuance, despite the defense having only 11 days to prepare. The prosecution, meanwhile, had been building their case for weeks before Zuri's arrest, suggesting they had targeted her specifically rather than following evidence to a suspect. "Your Honor, the defense cannot possibly be adequately prepared in this time frame," Marcus argued during the pre-trial hearing. "We've been denied access to key evidence, including the community center security footage, which would exonerate my client. The prosecution has informed the court that the footage was automatically erased after 7 days, as is their standard procedure," Judge Blackwood replied with thinly veiled satisfaction. Your motion for continuance is denied. This court will not delay justice for the victims of this burglary. The jury selection process revealed another layer of manipulation. The initial jury pool of 60 contained 14 black citizens and 9 Latinos. By the time selection finished, the jury consisted of 11 white jurors and 1 elderly Asian man. District Attorney Preston had used peremptory challenges to eliminate every black potential juror, offering flimsy excuses for each dismissal. Your Honor, the prosecution is clearly violating Batson v. Kentucky by systematically excluding black jurors, Marcus objected after the 6th consecutive black juror was dismissed. Ms. Preston has provided race-neutral reasons for each challenge, Counselor, Judge Blackwood responded dismissively. This court finds no Batson violation. Preston had claimed 1 black juror looked disinterested, another seemed hostile to authority figures, and a third failed to make eye contact. All subjective assessments impossible to disprove, yet following clear patterns of racial bias. Meanwhile, Zuri's health deteriorated in detention. The stress, inadequate nutrition, and cold, damp conditions of her cell led to pneumonia. Her requests for medical attention were ignored until she began coughing blood during a visit with her mother. Finally seen by medical staff, Zuri was given basic antibiotics, but returned to the same conditions that had made her ill. A sympathetic nurse, Diane Rodriguez, documented Zuri's condition and the neglect she had suffered. I'll testify if needed, Nurse Rodriguez whispered while checking Zuri's temperature. What they're doing to you is wrong. This small victory was quickly crushed. The next day, Nurse Rodriguez was fired for protocol violations, and Zuri's updated medical records mysteriously omitted any mention of pneumonia or neglect, describing only a mild upper respiratory infection properly treated. With trial just days away, District Attorney Preston approached Marcus with a plea deal. Zuri would admit guilt to a reduced charge of breaking and entering, serving 5 years instead of the potential 15 for felony burglary. This is your client's one chance, Johnson, Preston warned in the courthouse corridor. Judge Blackwood doesn't look kindly on defendants who waste the court's time with trials when the evidence is this overwhelming. Evidence that was planted, Marcus countered. Zuri won't plead guilty to something she didn't do. Noble, Preston smirked. But nobility won't keep her out of adult prison when she turns 18. The judge can order her detention extended. Think about it. Marcus brought the offer to Zuri during their next consultation. Despite her weakened condition, her resolve remained unbroken. I won't lie and say I committed a crime, Zuri insisted, her voice hoarse from coughing. My grandmother always said truth is worth suffering for. If I admit guilt for something I didn't do, they win twice. They get their conviction and they break my spirit. Her courage moved Marcus deeply. We'll fight this together, Zuri, I promise you. The case finally attracted media attention when the Regional Civil Rights Coalition held a press conference questioning Zuri's treatment. Several national news outlets picked up the story, focusing on the questionable circumstances of her arrest and the rush to trial. The Westridge Police Department immediately launched a counter-offensive, releasing selectively edited portions of Zuri's school records suggesting disciplinary issues that simply didn't exist. Chief Hargrove personally held a press conference defending his officers. The Williams girl is no angel, Hargrove declared to assembled reporters. Her supporters are trying to make this about race when it's simply about crime and consequences. Detective Caldwell has an exemplary record and followed proper procedure in every aspect of this arrest. What Hargrove didn't mention was that Detective Caldwell had been the subject of 23 civilian complaints for misconduct, none of which appeared in his official record, thanks to the chief's intervention. The tide began to turn when an anonymous source leaked internal police department emails to reporter Jamila Washington at the Regional Tribune. The emails revealed a pattern of targeting minority drivers in affluent neighborhoods and included specific mentions of filling quotas for the detention center. Washington's explosive article forced Judge Blackwood to address the allegations in a special hearing, which he predictably closed to the press. Inside the courtroom, he dismissed the emails as irrelevant to the specific charges and warned Marcus about trying this case in the media, as Isabel dug deeper into the connections between Westridge officials and the detention center. She discovered something even more disturbing. The commissioner repeatedly mentioned in intercepted communications was Charles Montgomery, whose company Westridge Correctional Holdings had paid millions in consulting fees to shell companies owned by Judge Blackwood, D.A. Preston, and Chief Hargrove. More shocking still, Judge Blackwood and Montgomery had been law partners 20 years earlier, before Blackwood was appointed to the bench, a connection neither had ever publicly disclosed despite Montgomery's company regularly appearing before Blackwood's court in various capacities. The night before final trial preparations, Elaine Williams returned home from visiting Zuri to find her front door smashed open. Inside, every room had been ransacked and racial slurs were spray-painted on the walls. On her daughter's bedroom mirror, written in red paint, was the message, "Drop the case or drop dead." When police finally arrived 3 hours after her call, they spent 10 minutes taking notes before declaring it was probably just kids and that there was little chance of finding the perpetrators. No forensic team was called, no fingerprints collected, no investigation conducted. As the trial date loomed, the machinery of injustice seemed unstoppable. Yet unknown to Montgomery and his corrupt allies, the evidence Zuri was gathering inside the detention center, combined with Isabel and Marcus's outside investigation, was assembling into a case far more explosive than one teenage girl's wrongful arrest. The entire corrupt system that had operated with impunity for decades was about to face unprecedented scrutiny. Have you ever witnessed the system stack the deck against someone because of their race? Comment number 1. If you believe corrupt officials should face harsher penalties than the crimes they falsely prosecute. Like and subscribe to support stories that expose injustice and show the power of standing firm in the truth. What lengths would you go to protect your child from a system determined to crush them? Keep watching to see the shocking courtroom confrontation that will leave Judge Blackwood and his cronies scrambling for cover. The morning of Zuri's trial arrived with a palpable tension hanging over the Westridge County Courthouse. Outside, small groups of protesters carried signs demanding justice, while a heavy police presence kept them confined to a designated area far from the courthouse steps. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity, with a noticeable racial divide. Supporters of Zuri, predominantly black and Latino, clustered on one side, while the other side filled with mostly white spectators, including several uniformed police officers there to support Detective Caldwell. Zuri entered in a conservative navy blue dress her mother had brought for the trial, though her improved appearance couldn't hide the weight she'd lost or the dark circles under her eyes from weeks in detention. All 12 jurors studied her intently as she took her seat beside Marcus, their expressions revealing nothing of their predispositions. Judge Blackwood swept in, his black robes billowing around him as he ascended to the bench. "Court is now in session," he announced, fixing Zuri with a cold stare before turning to the attorneys. "Opening statements may begin." District Attorney Victoria Preston approached the jury, every aspect of her appearance carefully calculated to project authority and trustworthiness. Her charcoal suit, subtle makeup, and pearl necklace created an image of professional rectitude that stood in stark contrast to the devastating accusations she was about to level. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Preston began, "this case is about a young woman who saw an opportunity and took it. On April 12th, Zuri Williams drove into Pine Heights, one of our community's most affluent neighborhoods. While pretending to volunteer at a community center, she surveilled potential targets. At approximately 6:45 p.m., she entered the Thompson residence through an unlocked side door, stole jewelry valued at over $50,000, and attempted to flee the scene. Thanks to the quick response of Detective Caldwell and Officer Reed, she was apprehended with the stolen items still in her possession. Preston paced deliberately before the jury box. The defense will attempt to make this about race, about systemic issues, about anything except the simple facts of the crime committed. Don't be distracted. Focus on the evidence, which will prove beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant committed burglary as charged. Marcus Johnson rose next, straightening his tie as he approached the jury. Unlike Preston's calculating polish, his demeanor conveyed authentic passion for justice. "This case is indeed simple," Marcus began, "but not in the way Miss Preston suggests. This is about an innocent honor student who was targeted, framed, and railroaded by a system that saw her race before her humanity. Zuri Williams has never been in trouble, not once, in her 17 years. She maintains a perfect GPA, volunteers teaching literacy to underprivileged children, and plans to become an attorney to serve her community." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. "The evidence will show that Zuri was at the Pine Heights Community Center at the time of the alleged burglary. It will show that the officers who arrested her conducted an illegal search of her vehicle and planted evidence. It will show a pattern of similar misconduct by these same officers against other minority citizens." Judge Blackwood shifted uncomfortably as Marcus touched on the pattern of misconduct. "Counselor, confine your statements to this specific case." "Your Honor, the pattern establishes motive and method," Marcus responded firmly before turning back to the jury. "By the end of this trial, you won't just doubt the prosecution's case, you'll be certain of my client's innocence and disturbed by the lengths to which certain officials have gone to frame her." The prosecution called Detective Caldwell as their first witness. Immaculately dressed in his police uniform, adorned with commendation pins, Caldwell projected absolute confidence as he was sworn in. Preston led him through a carefully rehearsed testimony describing the burglary call, the vehicle description that supposedly matched Zuri's car, and the traffic stop that led to her arrest. "And what did you discover during your lawful search of the vehicle?" Preston asked. "In the back seat, partially concealed under a jacket, we discovered this velvet pouch," Caldwell replied, indicating the evidence bag Preston held up. "Inside were several pieces of jewelry, later identified by Mrs. Thompson as stolen from her home." "Did the defendant say anything when you discovered these items?" "She claimed they weren't hers, that they must have been planted. Standard denial we often hear from perpetrators when caught with evidence." When Preston concluded, Marcus approached for cross-examination. The tension in the courtroom intensified as everyone sensed the coming confrontation. "Detective Caldwell, you testified that you stopped Ms. Williams because her vehicle matched the description from the burglary call. What exactly was that description?" "A dark-colored sedan heading east on Maple Avenue." "A dark-colored sedan," Marcus repeated. "Not a specific make, model, or license plate?" The witness was distressed. "That was the best description we had." "And approximately how many dark-colored sedans would you estimate travel that road during rush hour?" "Objection," Preston interjected. "Calls for speculation." "Sustained," Judge Blackwood ruled promptly. Marcus pivoted. "Detective, what time did you receive the burglary call?" "Approximately 6:30 p.m. "And what time did you stop Ms. Williams?" "Around 7:15 p.m. Yet in your initial report you wrote 7:05 p.m., which is correct?" Caldwell hesitated. "The 7:15 time is correct. I made a typographical error in the report. A 45-minute gap between the call and the stop, during which time you didn't stop any other dark sedans? This vehicle was heading directly from the vicinity of the crime. Detective, you testified that you observed the velvet pouch in the back seat, partially concealed. Show the court on this diagram of the car exactly where you were standing when you first observed this evidence." As Caldwell indicated a position by the driver's window, Marcus pressed on. "From that position, the back seat would have been obscured by the driver's seat headrest. Are you claiming you have X-ray vision, Detective Caldwell?" "Objection." Badgering. "The witness." Preston rose to her feet. "Sustained," Judge Blackwood ruled. "Watch your tone, counselor." Marcus had scored a point, however, as several jurors frowned at the inconsistency in Caldwell's testimony. For the next hour, Marcus continued to expose small contradictions in the timeline, the search procedure and the handling of evidence, gradually building a picture of improper police conduct. When Officer Reed took the stand next, his testimony matched Caldwell's almost too perfectly, raising suspicions they had coordinated their stories. Under Marcus's cross-examination, Reed became increasingly defensive, especially when confronted about his previous disciplinary issues. "Officer Reed, is it true you were suspended in 2021 for conducting improper searches without probable cause?" "Objection." Preston nearly shouted. Prior incidents are irrelevant to this case. They establish pattern and credibility, Your Honor, Marcus countered. After a long pause, Judge Blackwood ruled, sustained, the jury will disregard the question. Marcus continued probing, finding another vulnerability when Reed's description of exactly where the jewelry was found differed slightly from Caldwell's account. When Marcus highlighted this discrepancy, Reed's face flushed with anger. We found stolen property in her car. That's what matters. This outburst caused several jurors to exchange glances, the first real crack in the prosecution's case. The prosecution's next witness, forensic analyst Gregory Palmer, testified that the jewelry found in Zuri's car matched descriptions of the stolen items. Under cross-examination, however, he admitted no fingerprint analysis had been conducted on the velvet pouch or the jewelry. So you cannot testify that my client ever touched these items, Marcus pressed. No fingerprint evidence was requested by the detectives, Palmer acknowledged reluctantly. As the day's testimony continued, Zuri noticed something disturbing. Juror number 7, a middle-aged white man, seemed to be making subtle nods whenever D.A. Preston made key points. More concerning, Preston occasionally glanced directly at him when emphasizing certain evidence, as if seeking confirmation. During a recess, Zuri whispered her observations to Marcus, who immediately brought the concern to Judge Blackwood in chambers. Your Honor, we have reason to believe Juror 7 may have improper communications with the district attorney. We request he be questioned about any potential relationship with the prosecution. That's absurd, Blackwood dismissed without investigation. Unless you have actual evidence of jury tampering, Counselor, I suggest you focus on your already challenging case. Outside the courthouse, media coverage of the trial had grown substantially. National civil rights organizations issued statements of concern about the handling of the case, and social media campaigns demanding justice for Zuri had gained traction. In response, the Westridge Police Department stationed riot officers around the courthouse, creating an atmosphere of intimidation for Zuri's supporters. When peaceful protesters attempted to move closer to the courthouse steps, police responded with unnecessary force, pepper-spraying several demonstrators, including an elderly minister. The violent response was captured on dozens of cell phones, further inflaming public opinion against Westridge authorities. As the first day of trial concluded, Zuri returned to detention, exhausted but clinging to hope after seeing Marcus effectively challenge the prosecution's narrative. What she didn't know was that Charles Montgomery had summoned District Attorney Preston to his private office that evening. This is becoming a spectacle, Montgomery fumed, pouring himself expensive scotch without offering any to Preston. Johnson is making too many points with the jury. The media attention is growing. This needs to end. I'm handling it, Preston assured him, though her confident facade had cracks. Tomorrow I'll put Zuri on the defensive. We've prepared something special for her cross-examination. You'd better, Montgomery warned. Remember who financed your last campaign. Remember who can finance your opponent next time. The threat wasn't subtle, and Preston understood exactly what failure would mean for her political ambitions. As she left Montgomery's office, she made a call to Judge Blackwood, outlining a new strategy to ensure Zuri's conviction, regardless of the evidence or public opinion. The second day of trial began with Marcus preparing Zuri for her testimony in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. Dark circles under his eyes revealed he had worked through the night refining their strategy after yesterday's proceedings. Zuri, today is crucial, he explained, his voice low and urgent. When Preston cross-examines you, she'll try to provoke an emotional reaction. She wants you to appear angry, defensive, or disrespectful. Don't take the bait. Remain calm. Answer. Only what's asked, and always tell the truth. What if she twists my words? Zuri asked, anxiety evident despite her determination. Politely correct her. Say that's not what I stated, or I believe you've misunderstood my testimony. Never show frustration, no matter how unfair her questions become. Zuri nodded, taking deep breaths to center herself. Her hidden recording device was secured in her hair, disguised as a decorative clip Marcus had given her for confidence. She understood the stakes not just for her case, but for exposing the corruption permeating Westridge's justice system. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was even more charged than the previous day. Several national news outlets had sent reporters, though Judge Blackwood had refused to allow cameras. The gallery was filled beyond capacity, with people standing along the back wall despite the bailiff's objections. When Zuri took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. She was sworn in, her voice clear and steady as she pledged to tell the truth. Marcus began with gentle questions establishing her background, academic achievements, and volunteer work. Zuri, can you tell the court exactly where you were between 6 and 7:30 p.m. on April 12th? I was at the Pine Heights Community Center, sir. I stay every Tuesday and Thursday to give extra help to a 9-year-old boy named Miguel Rodriguez who struggles with reading comprehension. On April 12th, he finally managed to read a complete paragraph independently, which was a breakthrough moment. I stayed later than usual to help him celebrate this achievement and to prepare materials for our next session. Did you, at any point, leave the community center during this time period? No, sir. I was in the tutoring room the entire time. The center director, Mrs. Branson, checked on us around 6:30, and the janitor, Mr. Jenkins, asked us to finish up around 7 because he needed to lock the building. And what time did you actually leave the center? At approximately 7:10 p.m. I signed out in the volunteer log, gathered my materials, and walked directly to my car. Did you take anything from the center that wasn't yours? No, sir. Just my own belongings, my backpack, textbooks, and the teaching materials I'd created for Miguel. Had you ever been to the Thompson residence? Do you even know where it is located? No, sir, I've never been to any private residence in Pine Heights. I only know the route between the community center and the main road. Thank you, Zuri. Your witness, Ms. Preston. As District Attorney Preston approached the stand, her heels clicked aggressively against the floor, a sound designed to intimidate. She carried a thick folder, which she placed on the podium with theatrical precision. Ms. Williams, she began, emphasizing Zuri's last name as if it were a pejorative. You've painted quite a rosy picture of yourself as a model student and volunteer. Tell me, have you ever been disciplined at school? No, ma'am, I've maintained perfect attendance and conduct records throughout high school. Really? Not even a detention? Preston's tone conveyed disbelief. No, ma'am. Let's talk about your alleged presence at the community center. You claim you were tutoring this boy, Miguel, until after 7 p.m., yet we have no witness here to confirm this. Convenient, isn't it? The center director could confirm it, as could Mr. Jenkins, the janitor. Yet neither is here testifying. Why do you think that is? Objection, Marcus interjected. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Blackwood ruled, though his tone lacked conviction. Preston switched tactics. Ms. Williams, the community center sign-out log shows you left at 6:15 p.m., not 7:10 as you claim. Zuri maintained her composure despite the blatant lie. That's incorrect. I specifically remember signing out at 7:10 because I was concerned about being late home to help my mother with dinner. Are you suggesting our evidence is fabricated? Preston's voice rose in manufactured outrage. I'm stating what actually occurred. The time I wrote was 7:10 p.m. Preston produced a document with flourish. This is a photocopy of the sign-out sheet. It clearly shows 6:15 p.m. in your handwriting. When? Marcus requested to see the document. It was indeed a photocopy showing 6:15, where Zuri had written 7:10, the number clearly altered. Your Honor, we request production of the original document, not a photocopy, Marcus demanded. The original was unfortunately destroyed in routine document disposal, Preston replied smoothly. This certified copy is all that remains. Convenient. Timing, Marcus muttered, just loudly enough for the jury to hear. Preston continued her cross-examination. Ms. Williams, phone records show you made a call at 6:50 p.m. on April 12th. Who were you calling if you were supposedly busy tutoring? I didn't make any calls during the tutoring session. My phone was in my backpack. Preston produced another document. Phone records don't lie, Ms. Williams. This shows a 2-minute call from your number at 6:50 p.m. to a prepaid phone that has never been registered. Perhaps to an accomplice. That's impossible, Zuri replied, genuinely confused. I didn't make any calls. Before Marcus could object to this new, previously undisclosed evidence, Judge Blackwood intervened unexpectedly. "Ms. Williams," he interrupted, his voice cutting through the courtroom, "you've been looking directly at me while testifying. In my courtroom, this is considered disrespectful. Defendants should lower their gaze when addressing the court." A murmur of confusion rippled through the gallery. Even Preston seemed momentarily taken aback by this unusual intervention. "I apologize." "Your Honor," Zuri responded respectfully. "I was taught to make eye contact when speaking to someone. I intended no disrespect." "Your continued defiance is noted," Blackwood snapped, his face flushing with anger. "In this court, you will show proper respect or face consequences." Marcus rose immediately. "Your Honor, my client has shown nothing but respect. There is no legal requirement or court protocol that prevents a witness from making eye contact while testifying." "You're out of order, Counselor," Blackwood thundered, banging his gavel. "Ms. Williams, to demonstrate proper respect to this court, you will kneel when addressing me for the remainder of your testimony." A collective gasp erupted. From the spectators, Marcus launched to his feet, outrage evident in every line of his body. "Your Honor, this is unprecedented, inappropriate, and potentially unconstitutional. I vigorously object to this degrading treatment of my client." "Objection overruled," Blackwood replied coldly. "Officers, please assist the defendant in complying with the court's directive." Two uniformed deputies approached Zuri, hands resting on their weapons. The moment crystallized everything wrong with the Westridge justice system. Armed officers, forcing a black teenager to kneel before a white judge on a fabricated pretext, all under the guise of respect that was really about humiliation and control. With tears streaming down her face but determination in her eyes, Zuri stepped down from the witness stand. The courtroom had fallen into shocked silence as she slowly knelt on the hard marble floor. The officers positioned themselves on either side of her, a clear message that any resistance would be met with force. Even District Attorney Preston seemed uncomfortable with this development, though she quickly masked her reaction and prepared to continue questioning. From her kneeling position, Zuri fixed Judge Blackwood with an unwavering gaze. The hidden recording device captured everything: the judge's demand, Marcus's objection, the officer's enforcement, and the hushed, horrified reaction of the courtroom. "You may continue, Miss Preston," Blackwood directed, satisfaction evident in his tone. Before Preston could resume questioning, however, Blackwood glanced at his phone, which had vibrated with a message. Whatever he read caused a flicker of unease to cross his face. "The court will take a 5-minute recess," he announced abruptly, rising from the bench without explanation. As the judge exited, the courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Marcus immediately helped Zuri to her feet and guided her back to the defense table, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "What just happened?" Zuri whispered, still shaking from the ordeal. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but something's changed. Blackwood wouldn't call a recess in the middle of testimony without reason." What neither of them realized was that, in the gallery, Isabel Rodriguez had been quietly sending the video of Zuri's forced kneeling to every media contact, civil rights organization, and legal watchdog group in her extensive network. The recording, captured on Zuri's hidden device and wirelessly transmitted to Isabel's phone, was already spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. In those 5 minutes, while Judge Blackwood retreated to his chambers, the video of a black honor student being forced to kneel before a white judge would begin its journey to becoming the most damning evidence against systemic racism in the American justice system that had emerged in decades. Is forcing someone to kneel before a judge the kind of justice we want in America? Comment number 1. If you believe judges who abuse their power should be immediately removed from the bench, like and subscribe to follow this shocking story of judicial misconduct. And one brave girl stand against a corrupt system. Have you ever witnessed someone stand their ground with dignity, even when the system was designed to humiliate them? The next 5 minutes will change everything for Zuri and expose the rotten core of Westridge's justice system. Don't miss what happens when Judge Blackwood returns to find his actions have gone viral. The 5-minute recess stretched to 15 as Judge Blackwood remained sequestered in his chambers. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had transformed from tense formality to barely contained chaos. Court officers struggled to maintain order. As whispered conversations grew louder, evolving into open discussions about what they had just witnessed, Zuri sat at the defense table, her composure gradually returning, though her hands still trembled slightly. Marcus conferred with Isabel in urgent whispers, both of their phones buzzing incessantly with notifications. "It's everywhere," Isabel confirmed, showing Marcus her screen. "All major news networks have it. Social media is exploding. Yinzhao Zuri kneels, and Judge Blackwood resign are trending nationally." "How fast did this happen?" Marcus asked, astounded by the immediate public reaction. "The first outlet posted it 3 minutes after transmission. I've never seen anything go viral this quickly," Isabel replied. "People are outraged, Marcus. This might be the break we needed." At the prosecution table, District Attorney Preston appeared increasingly agitated, repeatedly checking her phone and dispatching assistants on hurried errands. The confidence she had projected earlier had evaporated, replaced by visible anxiety, as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. When Judge Blackwood finally re-entered the courtroom, his face was ashen. He moved stiffly to the bench, avoiding eye contact with everyone present. Gone was the imperious demeanor, replaced by the wary caution of a man who suddenly realized he stood on quicksand. "Court is back in session," he announced, his voice noticeably less commanding. Where before he had projected absolute authority, now uncertainty crept in around the edges of his words. Before proceedings could resume, the courtroom doors opened to admit several new attendees, 2 women and a man in impeccable suits who took seats in the back row. Isabel leaned toward Marcus and whispered, "State Attorney General's office." And behind them, those 2 men are federal observers from the Justice Department Civil Rights Division. Judge Blackwood noticed the new arrivals and visibly flinched. "Ms. Preston, you may continue your cross-examination of the witness," he directed, though his tone had lost its edge. Preston approached Zuri, who remained seated at the defense table, rather than returning to her kneeling position. Notably, neither Blackwood nor the court officers made any move to enforce his previous directive. "Ms. Williams," Preston began, her voice lacking its earlier aggression, "perhaps we could clarify some points about your phone records." "Your Honor," Marcus interrupted, rising to his feet, "the defense renews its objection to this line of questioning. The phone records Ms. Preston referenced were never provided during discovery, despite our explicit requests for all evidence related to my client. This constitutes a Brady violation and warrants immediate sanctions." In the old dynamic, Blackwood would have dismissed such an objection peremptorily. Now, however, he seemed to weigh his response carefully, aware of the scrutiny suddenly focused on his courtroom. "Ms. Preston, were these phone records included in the discovery materials provided?" "To the defense?" Blackwood asked with surprising neutrality. Preston hesitated. "They were recently obtained, Your Honor." "Recently as in after discovery deadlines, after the trial began?" Blackwood pressed, visibly distancing himself from the prosecution's tactics. "Yes, Your Honor," Preston admitted reluctantly. "Then the records are excluded, and the jury is instructed to disregard any testimony regarding phone calls allegedly made by the defendant on April 12th, Blackwood ruled, causing several jurors' eyebrows to rise in surprise at this unexpected turn. Marcus seized the moment. "Your Honor, given this Brady violation and other irregularities in the prosecution's case, the defense moves for an immediate mistrial." Before Blackwood could respond, a bailiff approached the bench and handed him a note. Whatever it contained caused the judge to blanch further. "This court will take another recess," he announced abruptly. "We will reconvene in 1 hour." As Blackwood hurried from the courtroom, the gallery erupted in speculation. Outside in the courthouse corridor, Marcus found himself surrounded by reporters shouting questions about the kneeling incident and the judge's behavior. "My client has been subjected to a pattern of discriminatory treatment since her arrest," Marcus stated for the cameras now permitted in the courthouse. "What happened today is merely the visible manifestation of the bias that permeates the Westridge justice system. We are grateful that the world now sees what we have been fighting against." Meanwhile, Zuri was permitted a rare moment with her mother in a private conference room. Elaine enveloped her daughter in a fierce embrace, tears flowing. freely down both their faces. "Baby, are you okay?" Elaine asked, examining Zuri as if searching for physical injuries. "I'm okay, Mom," Zuri assured her, strength returning to her voice. "When he made me kneel, I thought about Grandma and all she endured during the civil rights movement. I felt her strength flowing through me." "She would be so proud of you," Elaine whispered. "So proud of your dignity. The whole world is watching now, baby. They all see what these people tried to do to you." Outside the courthouse, the scene had transformed dramatically. What had been a small group of protesters the previous day had swelled to hundreds, their ranks growing by the minute as people from surrounding communities arrived in response to the viral video. Civil rights leaders who had been monitoring the case remotely had chartered flights to Westridge, determined to witness the proceedings firsthand. When court reconvened an hour later, the changes were immediately apparent. Television cameras had been permitted into the courtroom, an unprecedented reversal of Blackwood's previous ban on recording devices. The gallery was now filled with national media, civil rights observers, and legal experts, all watching intently as the judge returned to the bench. "In light of recent developments," Blackwood began, not meeting anyone's eyes, "I am recusing myself from this case due to health concerns. The matter will be reassigned to another judge, and all proceedings are temporarily suspended pending that reassignment." With those words, Blackwood exited the courtroom for the final time, his judicial career effectively over, though the formal investigations and ethics charges would take months to unfold. In the chaos that followed, something even more significant occurred. A representative from the State Attorney General's office approached the bench and announced that given the circumstances, the state was requesting the defendant's release on her own recognizance pending review of the case. Within hours, Zuri Williams walked out of the Westridge County Courthouse a free woman, at least temporarily. The community that had rallied around her case greeted her emergence with thunderous applause and chants of "Justice for Zuri." Media cameras captured her dignified smile and the tears of joy and relief streaming down her mother's face. That evening, local news coverage was preempted by national broadcasts featuring legal experts analyzing the unprecedented events in Westridge. The video of Zuri kneeling had been viewed over 10 million times across various platforms, drawing condemnation from judicial ethics experts, civil rights organizations, and even conservative legal scholars who emphasize the importance of courtroom decorum by judges as much as defendants. As Zuri finally returned home after 14 days in detention, the moment of triumph was cut brutally short. Approaching their house, Elaine spotted smoke rising from the roof. By the time they reached the driveway, flames were visible through the front windows. "No!" Elaine cried, reaching for her phone to call 911. "Not our home!" Neighbors had already reported the fire, and sirens wailed in the distance, but it was clear the damage would be extensive. As they watched helplessly from the street, Zuri noticed something the firefighters would later confirm. The fire had multiple points of origin, a clear sign of arson. Spray painted on the sidewalk in front of their burning home was a chilling message: "Justice is blind, but we see you." The victory that had seemed so complete just hours before now revealed its limitations. Zuri might have exposed the corruption in Westridge's courtrooms, but the forces behind that corruption were far from defeated, and they had just demonstrated their willingness to escalate from legal persecution to physical destruction. As news cameras captured the Williams home burning, the nation witnessed not just the price of standing up to systemic racism, but also the lengths to which those invested in maintaining that system would go to protect their power and privilege. For Zuri and her mother, watching flames consume their life's possessions, the message was clear. This was not the end of their ordeal, but merely the transition to a new and potentially more dangerous phase of the battle. The morning after the fire, Zuri and Elaine Williams sat in a small motel room provided by emergency services, surrounded by donated clothes and toiletries, all they now possessed. The television played continuous coverage of both the courthouse incident and the subsequent arson, with experts and commentators debating whether the events were connected. Officials have not confirmed any link between yesterday's controversial court proceedings and the fire at the Williams residence, a somber reporter stated, standing before the charred remains of their home. However, Community leaders are calling for an investigation into what they describe as a pattern of intimidation and retaliation. A knock at the door revealed Marcus and Isabel, both appearing exhausted but determined. "We have news," Marcus announced once they were inside. "Judge Blackwood has officially recused himself, citing health concerns. The case has been reassigned to Judge Patricia Reynolds." "Is that good for us?" Elaine asked, her voice hoarse from smoke and tears. "Very good," Isabel confirmed. "Reynolds has a reputation for fairness and strict adherence to procedure. She's one of the few judges in the district who's never been linked to Montgomery's network." "There's more," Marcus continued. "The State Attorney General's office has taken over prosecution of the case from Victoria Preston, citing irregularities in the initial proceedings. They've filed a motion to temporarily suspend all proceedings, pending a review of evidence handling and witness treatment." "Does that mean the charges are being dropped?" Zuri asked hopefully. "Not yet," Marcus cautioned. "But it's a step in that direction. The AG's office doesn't want to be associated with what happened in that courtroom. They're looking for a face-saving way to make this go away." The hopeful moment was interrupted when Marcus's phone rang. After a brief conversation, his expression darkened. "That was my office manager. Someone broke in last night. Every file related to your case is gone, physical copies and the backup drive. My computer was hacked, with only case-related files deleted. They're trying to destroy evidence," Isabel concluded grimly. "It gets worse," Marcus added, checking a text message that had just arrived. "My paralegal just heard that Detective Caldwell and Officer Reed have been placed on administrative leave with full pay and benefits. They're calling it standard procedure during a review, but it effectively shields them from questioning." Later that morning, a press conference was held outside Westridge Police Headquarters. Chief Robert Hargrove stood before a forest of microphones, flanked by uniformed officers and representatives from the police union. "The Westridge Police Department has served this community with distinction for decades," Hargrove declared, his voice swelling with rehearsed indignation. "The actions of Judge Blackwood, while unfortunate, have no bearing on the facts of this case or the conduct of our officers. Detective Caldwell and Officer Reed followed proper procedure during the arrest and evidence collection. We stand by their work 100%. Hargrove's rhetoric shifted to attack mode. "What we're seeing is the exploitation of an isolated incident by activists pushing a political agenda. The video circulating online has been selectively edited to create a false narrative. We ask the public to reserve judgment until all facts are known." This blatant falsehood, the video had been published unedited in its entirety, signaled the beginning of a coordinated counteroffensive against Zuri and her supporters. Within hours, the Westridge Police Officers Association organized a Back the Blue rally, drawing hundreds of supporters. Speakers characterized Zuri as a criminal playing the race card, and Marcus as an opportunistic lawyer, exploiting racial tensions. Some attendees carried signs reading, "Evidence don't lie," and support Caldwell and Reed. Meanwhile, a more subtle campaign unfolded in local and regional media outlets owned by Montgomery's conglomerate. News stories began emphasizing Zuri's alleged burglary while minimizing judicial misconduct. Opinion pieces questioned why a supposedly innocent person would provoke a judge, suggesting Zuri had been deliberately disrespectful to create a distraction from her guilt. A significant victory came when the FBI announced a preliminary investigation into potential civil rights violations in Westridge's justice system. Agents arrived to interview Zuri, Elaine, and Marcus, taking detailed statements about the arrest, detention conditions, and courtroom events. "This is bigger than just your case now," the lead FBI agent explained to Zuri. "We're seeing indications of a pattern of discriminatory practices throughout the county's justice system. Your situation may have finally created the opening needed to address systemic issues." This breakthrough was immediately countered by Montgomery's extensive political connections. The State Attorney General, whose campaign had received substantial donations from Montgomery's various corporate entities, suddenly announced he would personally oversee the Westridge investigation, effectively slowing its progress and limiting its scope. The danger escalated when Marcus discovered his car's brake lines had been cut, nearly causing a serious accident. Though he couldn't prove who was responsible, The timing, the day after he filed an official complaint against Judge Blackwood with the Judicial Conduct Commission, seemed far from coincidental. Zuri and Elaine could no longer stay at the motel after receiving multiple threatening phone calls. The management, apologetic but firm, asked them to leave for the safety of other guests. With their home destroyed and no family in the area, they faced a frightening uncertainty until Isabel arranged for them to move to a safe house operated by a victims advocacy organization. "You can't tell anyone where you're staying," Isabel instructed as she drove them to the undisclosed location. "Not friends, not teachers, not even extended family. The people we're dealing with have resources and connections everywhere." As Zuri settled into the Spartan but secure accommodation, she struggled with the psychological impact of becoming effectively homeless and hidden. "I feel like I'm the criminal," she confided to her mother one night. "We're the ones in hiding, while they continue their lives normally." "Not for long," Elaine assured her, though her own faith in justice had been severely tested. "Truth always finds its way to light, baby. Always." Isabel's investigation continued to uncover disturbing connections. Montgomery's companies had donated heavily to campaigns of key state officials, including the Attorney General, 3 state Supreme Court justices, and the governor. His media holdings controlled narrative in most of the state, and his corporate empire employed thousands, giving him enormous economic leverage. Most concerning, Isabel discovered that Montgomery's private security firm, officially providing services to his various business interests, employed several former intelligence and military personnel with expertise in surveillance, intimidation, and covert operations. The tracking device found on Elaine's car matched equipment used by this security firm. As public attention to the case grew nationally, Montgomery unleashed his media assets in a coordinated smear campaign. Stories began, appearing questioning Zuri's character, academic record, and family background. Despite her spotless history, articles implied she had been involved in unspecified incidents that had been handled quietly by school administrators. Social media accounts with no posting history suddenly became active, claiming to be former classmates of Zuri, describing negative encounters that never occurred. Online forums filled with discussions about her case, many from accounts traced to the same few IP addresses, all pushing narratives that questioned her innocence. The psychological warfare extended to Marcus Johnson's family. After receiving detailed threats describing his children's daily routines, Marcus reluctantly sent his wife and kids to stay with relatives in another state. "They know where my daughter takes ballet lessons," he told Isabel, voice strained with worry and anger. "They described what my son was wearing to school yesterday. This isn't random intimidation, it's targeted surveillance." Despite the escalating pressure, Zuri found unexpected strength. During a community rally organized in support of her case, she made her first public appearance since the courthouse incident, delivering a powerful speech about justice and perseverance. "They took my home. They took my freedom. They tried to take my dignity," she told the crowd, her voice steady and clear. "But they cannot take my truth, and they cannot take our collective power to demand change." The speech was broadcast nationally, reinforcing public support for her cause. Yet even as Zuri spoke, Montgomery was meeting with state officials, leveraging his influence to contain the growing scandal before it could further damage his interests. "This needs to disappear," he instructed a group of political operatives in his private office. "I don't care how you do it, but that girl and her lawyer need to understand that continuing this fight will cost them everything." None of them realized that their conversation was being recorded by a maintenance worker, sympathetic to Zuri's cause, creating evidence that would later prove crucial in exposing the full extent of the conspiracy against her. If you've ever been silenced when speaking truth to power, comment number 1 to stand with Zuri against intimidation tactics. Like and subscribe to follow this story of courage in the face of systemic corruption. Have you noticed how those with power and wealth often use the media to control narratives and silence victims? Stay tuned to see how a secret whistleblower inside the police department risks everything to help expose the truth and the shocking price they pay for their courage. Judge Patricia Reynolds was everything Judge Blackwood was not: methodical, impartial, and rigorously ethical. At 62, her 20-year tenure on the bench had earned her respect across the political spectrum. Her appointment to Zuri's case initially raised hopes that justice might finally prevail. However, when Judge Reynolds requested the complete case file from court administration, troubling discrepancies immediately emerged. Key documents referenced in hearing transcripts were mysteriously absent. Evidence logs showed items that were nowhere to be found. Most concerning, the original community center sign-out sheet, which would have proven Zuri's alibi, was missing entirely, with only the suspiciously altered photocopy remaining. "This case file has been sanitized," Reynolds remarked to her clerk after reviewing the incomplete materials. "Contact Mr. Johnson and the Attorney General's office immediately. We need to address these inconsistencies before proceeding." The hearing that followed revealed the systematic obstruction that had occurred. As Marcus detailed the evidence previously submitted, but now missing, Judge Reynolds's expression grew increasingly grave. "Your Honor," Marcus concluded, "this pattern of missing evidence suggests deliberate tampering to prejudice my client's defense. We move for immediate dismissal of all charges based on prosecutorial misconduct and spoliation of evidence." The Assistant Attorney General, who had replaced Victoria, Preston, appeared genuinely disturbed by the revelations. "Your Honor, the Attorney General's office was unaware of these inconsistencies when we assumed responsibility for this case. We request 2 weeks to conduct an internal investigation and recover the missing materials if possible." Judge Reynolds granted the continuance, but added a crucial caveat. "Ms. Williams will remain released on her own recognizance during this period. Furthermore, this court is ordering preservation of all evidence related to this case, including electronic communications between the police department, the former prosecutor's office, and court administration. Any further evidence disappearance will result in severe sanctions." This judicial directive triggered panic among those involved in the conspiracy against Zuri. Emails, text messages, and phone records that would have revealed their coordination began vanishing from servers. Security. Camera footage from key locations was overwritten according to standard retention policies. Witnesses who had previously agreed to testify about seeing Zuri at the community center suddenly became unreachable. Marcus worked frantically to reconstruct the case from his backup files, many of which had survived on cloud storage despite the office break-in. Isabel's investigation continued to uncover connections between Montgomery's business interests and key officials in Westridge's justice system. A potential breakthrough came when Leticia Martinez, who had helped Zuri in detention and subsequently disappeared, was located by community volunteers. Living with a cousin in a neighboring county, she initially agreed to provide testimony about the abuses she had witnessed and experienced in detention. "Sergeant Miller targeted anyone who helped Zuri," Leticia explained during a preliminary interview with Marcus and Isabel. "He put me in solitary for 3 days just for sharing my dessert with her. When other girls asked about Zuri after she was released, they lost privileges too. It was like he had a personal vendetta." Leticia's testimony would have established a pattern of discriminatory treatment extending beyond Zuri to anyone associated with her crucial evidence of systemic bias. A statement was prepared, and Leticia was scheduled to meet with state investigators the following day. She never arrived. When Marcus sent a paralegal to check on her, Leticia's cousin reported that 2 men claiming to be police officers had taken her to answer some questions the previous evening. She hadn't been seen since. An immediate missing persons report was filed, but the investigation progressed with suspicious lethargy. 3 days later, Leticia reappeared, refusing to speak with Marcus or anyone connected to Zuri's case. "She's terrified," Leticia's cousin confided by phone. "She won't tell me what happened, but she wakes up screaming every night. She says if she testifies, they'll hurt her family next time." This pattern of witness intimidation repeated with alarming consistency. The community center janitor, Thomas Jenkins, who had initially confirmed seeing Zuri that evening, suddenly claimed memory problems. The nurse who had documented Zuri's mistreatment in detention resigned and moved out of state. Even former clients of Marcus, who had experienced similar treatment by Detective Caldwell, withdrew their consent to have their cases referenced. Despite these setbacks, public interest in the case continued to grow. Community searches were organized to locate Letitia and provide her protection, though she remained in hiding. Zuri herself, though traumatized by the arson and ongoing threats, showed remarkable resilience. At a church-organized community event, she spoke eloquently about her experience and the broader issues of racial injustice in the criminal justice system. "This isn't just about me," she told the assembled crowd. "It's about every person of color who enters a courtroom already presumed guilty. Every family torn apart by a system that sees us as statistics rather than human beings. What happened to me in that courtroom happens every day across this country, just without cameras to capture it." Her words resonated nationally, with civil rights organizations using her case to highlight broader patterns of judicial misconduct and racial bias. The pressure for a thorough investigation intensified, forcing the state authorities to at least maintain the appearance of taking the matter seriously. Then came a development that threatened to derail everything. Zuri began experiencing severe post-traumatic stress symptoms. Nightmares about kneeling in the courtroom and being trapped in the burning house left her sleep-deprived and anxious. Panic attacks struck without warning, particularly when she saw police officers or entered government buildings. The psychological weight of being both a victim and a symbol took its toll on the 17-year-old. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she confessed to her mother one night, tears streaming down her face. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Judge Blackwood staring down at me. I hear those officers laughing when they planted the evidence. I smell the smoke from our house." Elaine held her daughter close, her own eyes wet with tears. "You've carried so much, baby, more than anyone your age should ever have to. If you need to step back, we will find another way." But even in her darkest moments, Zuri found reserves of strength that surprised everyone around her. Drawing on her grandmother's civil rights legacy and her own sense of purpose, she continued to speak at community events despite her anxiety. Her honest acknowledgement of her struggle only made her message more powerful. "Yes, I'm afraid," she admitted during one rally. "Yes, I have nightmares, but giving up would mean they win not just against me, but against everyone fighting for justice. I refuse to let that happen." Meanwhile, the official investigation appeared increasingly compromised. The state investigators assigned to the case had connections to Montgomery's businesses. Evidence collected was mishandled or accidentally damaged. Interviews with key witnesses were conducted without proper documentation. When Marcus filed complaints about these irregularities, he was informed that the investigation needed to follow established protocols that conveniently prevented thorough examination of the power structures in Westridge. Isabel discovered an even more troubling connection. Two of the state investigators had previously worked for Montgomery's private security firm. Their financial records showed substantial payments from shell companies linked to Montgomery Enterprises just before they were assigned to Zuri's case. "They're sabotaging the investigation from within," Isabel concluded during an emergency strategy session. "Every piece of evidence we provide is being funneled directly to Montgomery's team. The breakthrough they desperately needed came from an unexpected source, a Westridge police officer named James Wallace, troubled by what he had witnessed. Within the department, anonymously contacted Marcus through an encrypted messaging service. "I've been with the department for 12 years, Wallace's message read. "What happened to Zuri Williams isn't an isolated incident. There's a quota system for arrests in affluent neighborhoods. Officers are rewarded for charging minorities with felonies instead of misdemeanors. Detective Caldwell specifically targets black teenagers driving through white neighborhoods. I have documentation." Marcus arranged a secure meeting, taking elaborate precautions to ensure Wallace's identity remained protected. The evidence he provided was explosive: internal memos establishing the quota system, performance reviews praising officers for increased felony charges against minorities, and recordings of command staff meetings where Chief Hargrove explicitly directed officers to make examples of black youths in white neighborhoods. Most damning was Wallace's eyewitness account of Detective Caldwell and Officer Reed discussing how they would plant evidence in Zuri's car before they even pulled her over, proving the stop was pretextual and the entire arrest premeditated. With this new evidence, Marcus and Isabel prepared to approach Judge Reynolds for dismissal of all charges and referral for criminal investigation of the officers involved. The night before the scheduled hearing, however, Officer Wallace was found severely beaten in the parking lot of a remote bar. Though he survived, his injuries included a traumatic brain injury that doctors warned might affect his memory and cognitive function. The message was unmistakable. No one who challenged the system was safe. Despite this intimidation, digital copies of Wallace's evidence had already been secured in multiple locations. Marcus proceeded with the motion hearing, presenting the evidence of police misconduct while carefully protecting Wallace's identity as the source. Judge Reynolds, visibly disturbed by the evidence presented, ordered an immediate evidence hearing, where both sides would present their full cases. This court takes allegations of evidence planting and witness intimidation extremely seriously, she declared. If substantiated, such actions strike at the very heart of our justice system. As the hearing date approached, Montgomery's network intensified their counteroffensive. Marcus discovered a sophisticated tracking device attached to his car's undercarriage, technology far beyond what local police typically used. Analysis revealed it was military-grade surveillance equipment, available only to high-level security contractors or government agencies. The message was clear. They were being watched constantly, their movements tracked, their communications potentially monitored. The psychological toll of this surveillance added to the already considerable stress on everyone involved in Zuri's defense. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, Montgomery leveraged his media connections to launch a series of investigative reports questioning Zuri's character and motives. Without providing evidence, these reports insinuated that she had a troubled history and suggested the entire courtroom incident had been staged to distract from her guilt. Social media campaigns amplified these false narratives, with armies of bot accounts spreading disinformation and attacking anyone who supported Zuri. Her school records were illegally accessed and selectively edited versions released to suggest disciplinary problems that had never existed. Through it all, Zuri maintained a dignity that inspired her growing base of supporters. Rather than responding directly to the smears, she focused on the systemic issues her case had exposed. "They want to make this about me as an individual," she explained during an interview with a national news program. "But it's really about a system that treats people differently based on the color of their skin. That's what they're afraid of, people recognizing." As the evidence hearing approached, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Isabel, working with digital forensics experts, recovered deleted security footage from a cloud backup of the courthouse system. The footage showed Judge Blackwood meeting with Detective Caldwell and Chief Hargrove in his chambers hours before Zuri's trial began, a clear ethical violation that suggested coordination of their testimonies and strategies. With mounting evidence of corruption at every level of Westridge's justice system, Zuri faced her greatest challenge yet, testifying about her experience before a grand jury that would determine whether criminal charges should be brought against those who had conspired against her. Despite her ongoing trauma and the very real threats against her and her family, she agreed to tell her story one more time. The night before her scheduled grand jury appearance, Montgomery was spotted boarding his private jet at Westridge Regional Airport, carrying several large suitcases. Whether this represented a planned vacation or an attempt to flee potential charges remained to be seen, but it suggested that even the most powerful player in the conspiracy was beginning to fear the consequences of his actions. After months of defensive maneuvers, Marcus Johnson and Isabel Rodriguez determined it was time to seize the initiative. Rather than simply responding to each new attack from Montgomery's network, they would launch a comprehensive legal and media counteroffensive targeting the entire corrupt system. "Filing individual complaints hasn't worked," Marcus explained to Zuri and Elaine during a strategy session at the Safe House. "They're using their influence to bury each complaint separately. We need to change our approach." Isabel nodded in agreement. "We're filing a federal civil rights lawsuit tomorrow, naming everyone involved: Judge Blackwood, D.A. Preston, Chief Hargrove, Detective Caldwell, Officer Reed, and Charles Montgomery himself. We're alleging conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. Will that actually work? Elaine asked skeptically. These people have gotten away with everything so far. Federal court is different, Marcus explained. Montgomery's local influence doesn't reach as far there, and we've caught the attention of some powerful allies. The most significant of these allies was Benjamin Douglas, a legendary civil rights attorney whose successful litigation had forced institutional reforms in police departments and court systems across the country. At 73, Douglas was selective about the cases he took, focusing on those with potential for systemic impact. Ms. Williams' case represents one of the most egregious examples of judicial misconduct I've witnessed in my 50-year career, Douglas announced at a press conference the day after the federal filing. The evidence of coordination between judicial, prosecutorial, and law enforcement officials to target a specific defendant based on race is overwhelming and demands not just dismissal of charges, but criminal prosecution of those responsible. Douglas's involvement dramatically amplified media coverage. National news programs that had given the case periodic attention now featured in-depth investigations. Major newspapers assigned investigative teams to examine Montgomery's business empire and its connections to West Ridge's criminal justice system. A digital forensics expert hired by Douglas's team made another crucial discovery. Despite the physical destruction of evidence, cloud backups existed for many of the deleted files and communications. Metadata from these files established a clear timeline of coordination between Judge Blackwood, D.A. Preston, and the police department in the weeks leading up to Zuri's arrest. They specifically targeted her, the forensics expert explained, displaying a recovered email from Caldwell to Hargrove dated 2 weeks before the arrest. This message identifies Zuri by name as a perfect candidate because of her clean record and college aspirations. They were deliberately seeking to make an example of a high-achieving black student. As public opinion shifted decisively in Zuri's favor, Montgomery deployed his considerable media resources in a full-scale character assassination campaign. Television stations owned by his conglomerate broadcast special reports questioning Zuri's academic achievements and community service, suggesting her mother had somehow orchestrated the entire controversy for financial gain. When these attacks failed to gain traction, Montgomery's operatives began targeting Zuri's supporters. Community leaders who spoke on her behalf found themselves subjected to tax audits, business inspections, and other forms of official harassment. Local businesses that displayed "Justice for Zuri" signs reported threatening phone calls and sudden cancellation of service contracts with government entities. Despite the intensifying pressure, Judge Reynolds remained steadfast in her management of the criminal case. During a status hearing, she addressed the escalating attempts to influence the proceedings. This court has received numerous communications attempting to sway its decisions in this matter, Reynolds stated for the record. Let me be absolutely clear. Justice in this courtroom is not for sale, not subject to political pressure, and not influenced by media campaigns. This case will be decided solely on the evidence and the law. Her principled stance earned her anonymous threats and a smear campaign in Montgomery-owned media outlets questioning her impartiality and competence. Despite these attacks, Reynolds ordered the release of all evidence related to Zuri's case, overruling objections from both the police department and the prosecutor's office. This transparency created a turning point. With full access to the evidence, Benjamin Douglas identified multiple instances where officers had altered reports, evidence had been mishandled, and witness statements had been fabricated or coerced. Most damning was Officer Reed's body camera footage, which had been withheld from discovery, but was included in the complete evidence file. The footage clearly showed Reed searching Zuri's car before any consent was given or warrant obtained. More significantly, it captured Reed approaching Caldwell with an empty evidence bag, then returning to the car and emerging minutes later with the same bag containing the jewelry he claimed to have found during the initial search. Armed with this irrefutable evidence of evidence planting, Marcus filed for immediate dismissal of all charges. Judge Reynolds scheduled an emergency hearing where the Assistant Attorney General, now fully aware of the misconduct in the case, did not oppose the motion. In light of the clear evidence of investigative impropriety and due process violations, the state of Georgia moves to dismiss all charges against Zuri Williams with prejudice, the prosecutor announced, effectively conceding that the case had been irreparably tainted by police and prosecutorial misconduct. Judge Reynolds granted the motion, adding, "This court further orders the immediate expungement of all records related to this matter from Ms. Williams' record. The events that have unfolded in this case represent a stain on our justice system that must be addressed through comprehensive reforms and accountability for those responsible." For Zuri and her mother, the dismissal brought profound relief but not a sense of complete victory. Their home remained destroyed. Their lives had been fundamentally disrupted. The trauma of the past months had left psychological scars that would take years to heal. "It's over," Elaine whispered, embracing her daughter as they left the courthouse surrounded by supporters and media. "The criminal case is over," Zuri corrected, wisdom beyond her years evident in her expression. "But the fight for real justice is just beginning." She was right. While the criminal charges had been dismissed, the federal civil rights lawsuit continued, now strengthened by Judge Reynolds' findings and the publicly released evidence. Benjamin Douglas expanded the suit to include claims of negligent supervision against the county and state for failing to address the pattern of misconduct within the Westridge justice system. The lawsuit created an opportunity to depose key figures under oath, potentially exposing the full extent of the conspiracy. Charles Montgomery, recognizing the danger this posed to his entire operation, deployed his final defensive strategy, attempting to buy silence. Through intermediaries, Montgomery offered Zuri and her mother a settlement that would have made them wealthy beyond imagination, $8 million, a new home in any location of their choosing, and fully paid college education for Zuri at any university in the world. The only condition? They would drop the federal lawsuit and sign non-disclosure agreements, preventing them from ever discussing the case publicly. The offer arrived at a vulnerable moment. Elaine had lost her job due to the time demands of Zuri's case and the relocation to the safe house. Their insurance had paid only a fraction of the value of their destroyed home, citing suspicious circumstances as grounds for limiting coverage. Financial pressures were mounting just as emotional exhaustion reached its peak. Marcus presented the offer without recommendation, explaining both the benefits and the costs. "This amount of money would secure your future," he acknowledged, "but it would also ensure that the systemic issues never get addressed, and that Montgomery and his network remain free to target others." Zuri and Elaine requested time to consider the offer, spending a long night discussing what justice truly meant to them. By morning, they had reached their decision. "We're rejecting the settlement," Zuri informed Marcus and Isabel when they arrived, "for the scheduled meeting. My grandmother didn't march and face police dogs for money. She did it for justice. That's what we want too, real justice, not just for us, but for everyone these people have hurt." Marcus nodded, pride evident in his expression. "I'll communicate your decision. Be prepared for them to respond aggressively." The response came quickly. Within hours of rejecting the settlement, Zuri received notice that the numerous scholarship offers she had received from prestigious universities were being reconsidered due to new information about her character. Investigation revealed that Montgomery's foundation was a major donor to each institution that withdrew its offer. Simultaneously, Elaine's potential employers began receiving anonymous warnings about hiring her, claiming she was litigious and unstable. The financial pressure intensified just as Montgomery had calculated it would. What Montgomery hadn't anticipated was the response from the wider community. When news of the scholarship withdrawals became public, a grassroots campaign emerged to create the Zuri Williams Scholarship Fund. Within 2 weeks, the fund had raised over $300,000 from thousands of small donations across the country, enough to guarantee Zuri's complete college education, regardless of where she chose to attend. Similarly, when Elaine's employment struggles became known, she received job offers from companies specifically seeking to support her family's stand against corruption. A national housing charity partnered with local builders to begin construction on a new home for the family, with materials and labor donated by community members. Montgomery had calculated that financial pressure would force compliance. Instead, his tactics had created a nationwide movement that transformed Zuri from a local cause to a national symbol of resistance against systemic racism in the justice system. The most unexpected development came when Officer Jason Reed, facing mounting evidence of his misconduct and potential federal charges, approached Marcus about a possible cooperation agreement. Recognizing that he might become the scapegoat for the entire conspiracy, Reed offered to testify about the department's targeting practices, evidence-planting protocols, and direct orders from Chief Hargrove to ensure Zuri's conviction. Caldwell told me specifically that the commissioner wants this one to stick, Reed revealed during his initial proffer session with federal prosecutors. We were instructed to find something, anything, to charge her with. The jewelry was provided to close before the stop was even made. This was all planned. Reed's cooperation created the first major crack in the conspiracy's unified defense. As news of his potential testimony spread through the department, other officers began approaching prosecutors, each seeking to protect themselves by providing information about the systemic corruption within Westridge's law enforcement. Learning of Reed's cooperation, Detective Caldwell disappeared, reportedly crossing the state line into Florida with a substantial amount of cash and multiple false identification documents. His flight not only suggested consciousness of guilt, but deprived Montgomery of a key ally who could have been pressured to maintain silence. Judge Blackwood, recognizing the collapsing defense, resigned from the bench, citing health concerns before ethics proceedings could formally begin. District Attorney Preston similarly announced her withdrawal from public service to focus on family. Though internal communications revealed she was negotiating with federal prosecutors for potential immunity in exchange for testimony against higher-level conspirators. As Montgomery's defensive network unraveled, Judge Reynolds issued arrest warrants for Caldwell, Hargrove, and Blackwood on charges ranging from evidence tampering to witness intimidation to conspiracy against rights. The State Attorney General, whose office had initially slowed the investigation, found himself forced to recuse due to his financial connections to Montgomery's businesses, resulting in appointment of a special prosecutor from the Justice Department. With no ties to Westridge politics, this special prosecutor convened a federal grand jury to hear evidence not just about Zuri's case, but about the entire pattern of discriminatory practices within Westridge's criminal justice system. Zuri would be just one of dozens of witnesses testifying about their experiences of racial targeting, evidence manipulation, and judicial bias. The night before Zuri was scheduled to testify, she sat with her mother in their temporary apartment, reviewing her prepared statement with Marcus and Isabel. "Are you nervous?" Isabel asked gently, noticing Zuri's hands trembling slightly as she turned the pages. Terrified, Zuri admitted with surprising candor. "But my grandmother always said that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Tomorrow I speak not just for myself, but for everyone who didn't have cameras recording when injustice happened to them." As Zuri prepared for her testimony, Charles Montgomery boarded his private jet at Westridge Regional Airport, ostensibly for a business trip to the Cayman Islands. Whether this represented a planned vacation or an attempt to flee potential indictment remained uncertain. But federal authorities took no chances, placing his flight under surveillance as the grand jury proceedings began. Officer Jason Reed's decision to cooperate with federal investigators triggered a cascade of defections from Montgomery's once loyal network. Facing potential decades in federal prison, Reed provided comprehensive testimony about the department's targeting of minority drivers, the planting of evidence, and the specific conspiracy against Zuri Williams. The order came directly from Chief Hargrove, Reed testified before the grand jury. He said this case was a priority for the commissioner. That's what we called Montgomery. We were told to find something on Zuri Williams specifically. Her name was provided to us before we ever encountered her. Reed revealed that the jewelry allegedly found in Zuri's car had been taken from the department's evidence room items from a burglary case closed years earlier. Detective Caldwell had personally selected these items because they matched the description of jewelry reported stolen in the fabricated burglary report they created as pretext for Zuri's arrest. Everything was staged, Reed explained. The burglary report, the traffic stop, the discovery of evidence. We'd done similar operations before, but never with this level of pre-planning or pressure from above. With Reed's testimony providing a roadmap, federal investigators issued search warrants for Chief Hargrove's home, office, and personal electronic devices. The evidence recovered was damning text messages coordinating with Judge Blackwood about case assignments, emails with District Attorney Preston discussing how to ensure convictions for specific defendants, and financial records showing payments from Montgomery's companies disguised as consulting fees. Most incriminating was Hargrove's personal diary, in which he had meticulously documented meetings with Montgomery where specific targeting priorities were established. One entry explicitly referenced Zuri. CM wants example made of Williams girl. High-profile student will send message to others, ensure maximum charges, and deny bail. As federal agents moved to arrest Chief Hargrove based on this evidence, he attempted to flee, leading to a brief standoff at his lake house before surrendering. His arrest, broadcast live on national news networks, visibly shook the remaining conspirators. Judge Blackwood, already hiding at his vacation property in North Carolina, was arrested the following day by U.S. Marshals. District Attorney Preston, seeing the inevitable, negotiated a plea agreement in exchange for her testimony against Montgomery, whom she identified as the architect of the entire corrupt system. Charles Montgomery controlled everything in Westridge, Preston revealed during her debriefing with federal prosecutors. He purchased the private prison company in 2015 and immediately began pressuring my office to increase conviction rates. He made it clear that my political future depended on keeping his facilities at maximum capacity. Preston provided documentation of how Montgomery had manipulated the entire criminal justice system to serve his financial interests. The private juvenile detention center received $750 per day for each bed filled, creating a powerful incentive to detain as many youths as possible for as long as possible. Similar arrangements existed for the adult facilities, with additional management bonuses tied to occupancy rates. The racial targeting wasn't initially explicit, Preston admitted, but the demographic patterns became clear over time. Montgomery would review our quarterly conviction statistics and express displeasure if the numbers for certain neighborhoods or demographic groups dropped. The message was unmistakable. As these revelations became public, Montgomery's carefully constructed public image as a philanthropist and community leader collapsed. Corporate partners distanced themselves from his businesses, political allies denied close relationships, and charitable organizations returned his donations. The empire he had built on corruption and human suffering began to crumble. Desperate to contain the damage, Montgomery attempted to destroy evidence of his involvement. A suspicious fire broke out in the records room of the courthouse, damaging documents related to cases identified in the federal investigation. Digital evidence on the courthouse servers was deleted by an unauthorized user whose access credentials linked back to Montgomery's chief of security. These clumsy attempts at evidence destruction only strengthened the case against him. Federal agents anticipating such moves had already created secure copies of all relevant documents and data. The attempted cover-up now added obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence to the growing list of potential charges. Even as Montgomery's legal position deteriorated, Isabel uncovered evidence of offshore accounts linked to Judge Blackwood, D.A. Preston, and several other officials. Financial forensics revealed millions of dollars routed through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Liechtenstein, all ultimately controlled by Montgomery's holding company. This wasn't just about prison profits, Isabel explained to the federal prosecutors. Montgomery created a complete capture of Westridge's justice system. Officials who cooperated were rewarded with offshore retirement accounts. Those who questioned the system found themselves isolated, investigated, or forced out. The special prosecutor appointed by the Justice Department presented this comprehensive evidence to the federal grand jury, which returned indictments against 12 individuals, including Montgomery, Blackwood, Hargrove, Caldwell, and several other officials involved in the conspiracy. The charges ranged from racketeering and civil rights violations to witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Montgomery, alerted to the impending indictment by remaining allies in local government, attempted to flee the country on his private jet. However, federal authorities had anticipated this move and diverted the aircraft to a secure facility where Montgomery was taken into custody, his arrest broadcast live on the same news networks that had once celebrated his philanthropic activities. The dramatic arrest crystallized the public narrative of Montgomery as the corrupt kingpin who had manipulated Westridge's justice system for profit. What remained less clear to the public was how deeply his influence had penetrated state and federal institutions. That question was partially answered when the federal courthouse where evidence was being stored suffered a sophisticated cyber attack, temporarily disabling security systems and allowing unauthorized access to digital evidence servers. Though the primary evidence had been backed up off-site, the breach demonstrated that Montgomery's resources and connections extended beyond what investigators had initially estimated. More concerning was the suspicious fire that destroyed critical, physical evidence stored in the federal building's evidence room. Initial investigation suggested professional arson techniques that had defeated multiple safety systems methods consistent with military or intelligence training. Montgomery's reach goes beyond local corrupted officials, Isabel warned during an emergency meeting with the federal prosecution team. His private security firm employs former intelligence operatives, military contractors, and specialists in exactly these types of operations. We need to assume he's still actively working to undermine this case, even from custody. This assessment proved accurate when key witnesses began receiving sophisticated threats delivered through previously secure channels. Family members of cooperating officers reported being followed by unmarked vehicles. Reed's elderly mother received photographs of her daily activities, accompanied by a note reading simply, "Silence is safety." Despite these intimidation attempts, the prosecution pushed forward, bolstered by Judge Reynolds' decision to cooperate fully with the federal investigation despite threats to her own safety. Her testimony about the manipulation of case assignments and judicial decisions provided crucial context for understanding how Montgomery had maintained control over case outcomes. Cases involving Montgomery's interests were deliberately channeled. To Judge Blackwood, Reynolds explained, "When I questioned these assignment patterns, I was informed they were random. Data analysis proves they were anything but random." Blackwood received 92% of cases involving Montgomery's business interests or defendants destined for his detention facilities. As the conspiracy continued to unravel, Zuri faced the most difficult decision of her ordeal, whether to testify before the grand jury about her personal experience. Despite ongoing threats and the psychological trauma of revisiting her ordeal, she ultimately chose to appear. Dressed simply but formally, Zuri entered the grand jury room with quiet dignity that belied her 17 years. For nearly 4 hours, she provided detailed testimony about her arrest, detention, and courtroom humiliation, maintaining remarkable composure even when describing the most traumatic moments. "When Judge Blackwood ordered me to kneel, I felt like I was being stripped of my humanity," she testified. "It wasn't about respect for the court, it was about power and humiliation. In that moment, I understood what my grandmother meant when she talked about the civil rights movement. Some injustices you cannot look away from. Some fights you have to take on, not just for yourself but for everyone who might come after you." Her testimony provided the human context for the mountain of documentary evidence, helping grand jurors understand the real-world impact of Montgomery's corrupt system on its victims. When she concluded, several jurors were visibly moved, with one elderly woman wiping tears from her eyes. Outside the courthouse, Zuri was greeted by supporters who had maintained a vigil throughout her testimony. National civil rights leaders stood alongside local community members who had supported her family throughout their ordeal. The crowd's applause as she emerged represented not just support for Zuri personally, but recognition of her courage in confronting systemic injustice. That evening, as Zuri and her mother returned to their temporary home, they received news that Montgomery had attempted to flee custody during a medical transport, suggesting he recognized the strength of the case against him. The attempt was quickly thwarted, but it indicated his growing desperation as more associates agreed to testify against him in exchange for leniency. The final piece of evidence against Montgomery came from an unexpected source. His longtime executive, assistant, fearing she would be scapegoated for carrying out his directives, provided prosecutors with recordings of meetings where Montgomery explicitly directed the targeting of minority defendants to maintain detention center occupancy rates. "We need those beds filled," Montgomery's voice declared on one recording. "Find me more of those kids from Oakwood and Pine Hills, the ones with no resources for decent lawyers. The profit margin on juvenile detention is triple what we make on the adult side." These recordings, combined with the testimony of those he had corrupted and controlled, formed an overwhelming case. After 2 weeks of hearings, the grand jury returned a 47-count indictment against Montgomery, characterizing his operation of Westridge's justice system as a criminal enterprise under the RICO statute, the same law typically used against organized crime families. As federal marshals prepared to transfer Montgomery to a maximum security facility pending trial, he made one final desperate attempt to escape justice. During transport, his security detail was ambushed by heavily armed men using military-grade weapons and tactics. Though the marshals successfully repelled the attack, the incident confirmed Isabel's warnings about Montgomery's extensive resources and connections beyond traditional law enforcement. In response, the Justice Department assigned a special team of marshals with counter-terrorism experience to secure Montgomery and all evidence related to the case. The prosecution team received additional security, as did key witnesses including Zuri and her mother. Despite these extraordinary security measures, the courthouse fire had destroyed key physical evidence linking Montgomery directly to specific criminal acts. His legal team, featuring high-priced attorneys with political connections, began filing motions to exclude various pieces of evidence based on chain of custody issues and alleged Fourth Amendment violations in the execution of search warrants. Just when the prosecution seemed at risk of losing critical components of their case, Isabel made a breakthrough discovery. While the courthouse fire had destroyed many original documents, the courthouse security system had maintained a backup of all security footage on a cloud server, including footage showing Judge Blackwood, Chief Hargrove, and Montgomery meeting in the judge's chambers hours before Zuri's trial began. This video evidence, combined with audio recordings from Zuri's hidden device, provided irrefutable proof of coordination between the three key conspirators specifically regarding her case. When this evidence was presented to Montgomery's attorneys, they immediately began exploring plea negotiations, recognizing that their client's chances at trial had significantly diminished. The special prosecutor, however, rejected initial plea offers that would have allowed Montgomery to serve minimal prison time at a low-security facility. The extreme nature of these crimes against justice itself demand proportional consequences, the prosecutor informed Montgomery's legal team. Any acceptable plea must include substantial incarceration, complete financial restitution to victims, and full cooperation against remaining conspirators. Facing the likelihood of spending the rest of his life in prison if convicted at trial, Montgomery ultimately accepted a plea agreement requiring him to serve 15 years in federal prison, forfeit over $200 million in illegally obtained assets, and provide complete testimony against anyone else involved in the corruption of Westridge's justice system. His plea and subsequent debriefing sessions revealed an even more extensive network of corruption than investigators had initially uncovered, implicating state officials, federal contractors, and even members of regulatory bodies responsible for overseeing detention facilities. The case expanded from a local corruption scandal to a multi-jurisdictional investigation that would continue for years. For Zuri Williams, however, the immediate legal nightmare had finally ended. With all charges dismissed and her record expunged, she could finally begin rebuilding her life and planning for the future that had nearly been stolen from her. The morning Charles Montgomery's private jet attempted to depart Westridge Regional Airport, marked the beginning of the end for the corrupt empire he had built. Acting on intelligence from cooperating witnesses, federal agents had positioned themselves strategically around the airfield. As Montgomery's luxury Gulfstream taxied toward the runway, FBI vehicles blocked its path while armed agents surrounded the aircraft. Live news coverage captured Montgomery's stunned expression as he was led from the plane in handcuffs. His carefully cultivated image as a philanthropic business leader instantly replaced by the reality of a desperate fugitive attempting to flee justice. The significance of this moment was not lost on the residents of Westridge, many of whom had suffered under the corrupt system he controlled. Within hours, coordinated arrests took place across the county. Judge Blackwood was taken into custody at his lakeside retreat, still wearing pajamas when agents arrived at dawn. Chief Hargrove surrendered after a brief standoff at his home, where he had barricaded himself upon learning of Montgomery's arrest. Detective Caldwell, who had fled to Florida, was apprehended at a beach resort where he had been hiding under an assumed name. The simultaneous arrests, planned with military precision by federal authorities, prevented the conspirators from coordinating their responses or destroying additional evidence. Their electronic devices, seized during the arrests, yielded damning communications that further strengthened the case against them. District Attorney Victoria Preston, recognizing the overwhelming evidence against her, became the first to negotiate a plea agreement. In exchange for reduced charges, she provided detailed testimony about the entire corrupt operation, how cases were assigned to ensure desired outcomes, how evidence was manipulated to secure convictions, and how Montgomery personally directed the targeting of minority defendants to maintain profitable occupancy rates in his detention facilities. It began subtly, Preston testified. Montgomery would invite key officials to fundraisers, make campaign donations, offer support for our initiatives. Once he had established relationships, he began suggesting priorities for law enforcement and prosecution. Those who cooperated received financial and political support. Those who resisted found themselves isolated or facing manufactured scandals. Preston's testimony revealed how Montgomery had systematically corrupted Westridge's justice system over a decade, placing allies in key positions and removing anyone who questioned his influence. The corruption extended beyond criminal cases to civil matters involving his business interests, zoning decisions affecting his properties, and regulatory oversight of his detention facilities. Judge Blackwood initially maintained his innocence, insisting his actions had been legally proper, if perhaps intemperate in Zuri's case. This defense collapsed when federal agents recovered deleted emails showing his direct coordination with Montgomery, including discussions of specific cases and defendants. Faced with this evidence, Blackwood negotiated his own plea agreement, receiving a 15-year sentence for judicial corruption, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. The investigation expanded as each cooperating defendant implicated others in the conspiracy. Federal investigators discovered that Montgomery's influence extended to multiple counties, with similar corrupt arrangements involving judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials beyond Westridge. What had begun as an investigation into one teenager's wrongful arrest had evolved into the largest public corruption case in the state's history. For Zuri Williams, the unraveling conspiracy brought long-awaited vindication. In a formal court proceeding covered by national media, Judge Patricia Reynolds dismissed all charges against her with prejudice, meaning they could never be refiled. Ms. Williams, Judge Reynolds stated for the record, this court extends its profound apology for the injustices you have endured within our justice system. Your dignity and courage throughout this ordeal stand as an example of the very best qualities we aspire to in our society. The record will reflect that you are exonerated of all charges which this court finds were fabricated and maliciously prosecuted. Beyond dismissing the charges, Judge Reynolds ordered the complete expungement of Zuri's record, ensuring that the false arrest and prosecution would never affect her future educational or employment opportunities. The court further ordered the county to pay for independent counseling services to address the trauma Zuri had experienced. The civil settlement negotiated by Benjamin Douglas went far beyond financial compensation. While the specific amount remained Confidential, sources indicated it exceeded $20 million funds that would secure Zuri's future and allow her mother to rebuild their lives. More significantly, the settlement included structural reforms to Westridge's justice system, including independent oversight of police arrest patterns and prosecution decisions to identify racial disparities, body cameras with automatic cloud backup for all police interactions, diversification, requirements for jury pools and judicial appointments, regular audits of detention facilities by independent inspectors, whistleblower protections for justice system employees who report misconduct, mandatory training on implicit bias for all justice system personnel. Rather than simply accepting her settlement, Zuri chose to establish the Williams Justice Foundation, dedicating a significant portion of the funds to helping other victims of judicial misconduct and advocating for systemic reforms. The foundation provided legal assistance to defendants who couldn't afford adequate representation, particularly in cases involving potential civil rights violations. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident," Zuri explained during the foundation's launch event. "It was one visible example of injustices that occur daily across our country. This foundation exists to ensure that no one faces the system alone and without resources, regardless of their race or economic status." 1 year after her ordeal began, Zuri was invited to testify before a congressional committee examining racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Her composed, articulate testimony about her experience captivated lawmakers and viewers alike, putting a human face on statistics that might otherwise have seemed abstract. When Judge Blackwood ordered me to kneel, he wasn't just humiliating one black teenager, she testified. He was demonstrating the mindset that permeates too many of our institutions, a belief that some citizens deserve dignity and others don't, based solely on the color of their skin. My case received attention because it was captured on video, but countless others suffer similar indignities without cameras present. Her testimony contributed to the passage of the Judicial Accountability and Transparency Act, legislation requiring federal courts to maintain comprehensive demographic data on case outcomes and establishing an independent review process for allegations of judicial misconduct. The law, informally known as Zuri's Law, represented one of the most significant judicial reforms in decades. Privately, Zuri continued to process the trauma of her experience with the help of therapy and her mother's unwavering support. While public appearances showed her composed and eloquent, she still experienced anxiety when encountering police officers or entering courtrooms. Nightmares about her detention and the courthouse kneeling incident persisted, though their frequency gradually diminished with treatment. Despite these challenges, Zuri remained determined to transform her painful experience into meaningful change. She began pre-law studies at Howard University, having received a full scholarship, along with acceptance letters from dozens of prestigious institutions across the country. Her goal of becoming a civil rights attorney now had a personal dimension that infused her studies with purpose and passion. During her second semester, Zuri accepted an internship with the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, the same division that had investigated her case. Working alongside attorneys dedicated to protecting constitutional rights gave her valuable insight into how the legal system could be used as a tool for positive change despite its flaws. Montgomery's detention facilities, now under state control following the forfeit of his assets, underwent comprehensive reform. Independent inspections revealed widespread abuses beyond those initially discovered, leading to further criminal charges against facility administrators and staff members. Hundreds of cases involving defendants processed through Montgomery's corrupt system were reviewed, resulting in numerous overturned convictions and releases. As for Westridge itself, the community began the difficult process of rebuilding trust in institutions that had been thoroughly corrupted. New leadership in the police department, prosecutor's office, and courts implemented the reforms required by Zuri's settlement, though changing organizational culture proved more challenging than changing policies. 2 years after her arrest, Zuri returned to the Westridge County Courthouse not as a defendant, but as a legal intern assisting with a civil rights case. She walked through the same hallways where she had once been led in handcuffs, past the very spot where she had been forced to kneel. Though the memories remained painful, her presence there as a future officer of the court represented a powerful reclamation of spaces that had once been sites of trauma. The courthouse itself had visibly changed. Where portraits of exclusively white judges had once lined the walls, a diverse array of judicial images now greeted visitors. The police force, previously overwhelmingly white and male, had undergone significant diversification under new leadership committed to community-oriented policing. Even the detention facility, now operated as a rehabilitation-focused public institution, bore little resemblance to the profit-driven operation Montgomery had run. In a poignant moment captured by documentary filmmakers following her story, Zuri stood on the courthouse steps, where she had once been held up as an example of the system's power to humiliate. Looking at the camera with quiet confidence, she delivered the closing statement that would inspire a generation of justice advocates. Systems don't change because we wish them to. They change because brave people challenge them, because communities demand better, and because truth eventually overwhelms even the most entrenched corruption. My grandmother used to say that justice is like a stubborn plant. It can be trampled, it can be poisoned, but given the smallest crack in the concrete, it will find a way to grow. Each of us has the power to create those cracks, to let the light in, to nurture justice where it seems impossible. This isn't the end of our work, it's just the beginning. As the documentary concluded, viewers saw Zuri entering a classroom at Howard University, taking her seat among the next generation of attorneys who would shape America's legal landscape. Her journey from wrongfully accused teenager to agent of systemic change embodied both the failures of the justice system and its capacity for transformation when ordinary citizens refused to accept injustice as inevitable. In Westridge and beyond, Zuri Williams' name became synonymous with courage in the face of corruption, with dignity that power could not diminish, and with the proposition that true justice requires eternal vigilance from those who believe in its promise. Zuri Williams' journey teaches us that systems of injustice can be dismantled when brave individuals refuse to accept discrimination. Her case reveals how institutions meant to protect citizens can become weaponized against marginalized communities when corruption goes unchecked. It demonstrates that racial bias in our justice system isn't just about individual prejudice, but often involves systemic networks that profit from discrimination. The story reminds us that accountability requires transparency. Without Zuri's hidden recording device capturing her forced kneeling, the corruption might have remained hidden. It shows how powerful interests will use intimidation, character assassination, and economic pressure to silence those who challenge the status quo. Most importantly, this narrative demonstrates that change requires collective action. While Zuri's courage was essential, she succeeded because a community rallied behind her. Skilled advocates fought for her, and public attention made it impossible to sweep injustice under the rug. True justice demands persistent vigilance and the willingness to stand firm even when facing overwhelming opposition. As Zuri discovered, dignified resistance in the face of humiliation can become the catalyst that brings down entire systems of corruption. Has your life ever been touched by injustice in the court system? Comment below sharing your experience or thoughts on what needs to change. If you believe our justice system needs reform to ensure equal treatment regardless of race, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose systemic injustice and celebrate those brave enough to fight back. Would you have had Zuri's courage to refuse a multi-million-dollar settlement in favor of pursuing true systemic change? Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of racial discrimination in our courts today. Thank you for witnessing Zuri's powerful journey. May her story inspire us all to recognize that justice is not just a concept, but something we must actively create together every day. Remember, in the words of Dr. King, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But only when we make it bend